Amina had always dreamed of a happy life in Merna, a town full of color, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread from the market. She was cheerful, kind, and loved by everyone who knew her. When she married Tendo, a wealthy trader with a sharp mind and quick tongue, she thought her dreams had come true. The wedding was full of music and dancing, and villagers came from nearby towns to celebrate. For the first few weeks their home was filled with joy. Amina cooked meals with love, laughed with neighbors, and walked through the streets hand in hand with Tendo. She imagined they would grow old together, sharing happiness and respect. But soon Tendo began to change. At first it was small things, little comments about her cooking, remarks about how she spent her day, and jokes that made her feel invisible. "A woman's work is in the kitchen," he would say, laughing as if she should be grateful to sweep and cook for him. At first, Amina tried to smile and ignore him, telling herself that pride was a passing thing, and that love could soften even the hardest heart. Days turned into weeks and Tendo's arrogance grew. He began to speak loudly in public, criticizing her in front of neighbors. "Amina, you should learn faster. A woman who cannot manage a home will never be respected," he told her one afternoon while they sat outside their small courtyard. Villagers who overheard him murmured quietly, some pitying her, some nodding in agreement. Amina felt a mix of sadness and anger, but she did not shout or fight back. She had learned from her mother that wisdom was more powerful than anger. Her mother often said, "My daughter, patience and cleverness can teach lessons that anger never can." Amina kept these words close to her heart, and she decided that she would not let Tendo's pride destroy her spirit. Instead, she began observing him carefully. She watched how he spent his days, how he managed his small trading shop, how he treated his customers, and how he reacted when things went wrong. She noticed that he was clever and sharp, but quick to anger when something challenged his pride. Amina realized that if she wanted to teach him a lesson, she would need to show him a different kind of strength, one that came from calmness, planning, and skill. Every evening, after Tendo went to bed, Amina would sit by the small window in their house and think. She would write in her notebook, jotting down ideas for how she could work quietly to gain respect without clashing with him. She thought about starting a small project of her own, something that would show her talents and make the villagers recognize her value. But she knew she had to be patient. Any rush could backfire, and Tendo might dismiss her efforts. One day, Tendo came home with a large bag of goods he had traded in the neighboring town. He dumped them on the floor without a word to Amina. "Sort these, clean the shop, and make sure everything is perfect for tomorrow's market," he barked. Amina bowed her head quietly and began arranging the items. She noticed his impatience, his loud voice, and the way he assumed she would obey without question. But instead of resentment, Amina felt a quiet determination. She would do the work, yes, but she would also find her own way to shine. She thought of the small baskets she had learned to weave as a child, the ones her mother had taught her to make with care and patience. Perhaps, she thought, there was a way to turn her skill into something more than a hobby. That night, as the moonlight spilled into the courtyard, she began gathering materials quietly. She worked by candlelight, weaving baskets with precision and care. Each one was unique, each one a small testament to her talent. She did not tell Tendo, nor did she seek praise. Instead, she worked silently, her heart filled with hope and a plan. In the days that followed, she continued this secret work. She would wake early to help Tendo prepare for his trading trips and return home to weave her baskets. Neighbors began to notice the subtle beauty of her work, the delicate patterns, the bright colors, and the care in every piece. Some even asked if they could buy a basket or two, but Amina would smile and say, "I will see if I can make more tomorrow." Tendo, meanwhile, continued to behave arrogantly. He did not notice the changes in the village's attention. He continued to boast in the market, criticizing merchants and assuming that his pride alone kept him respected. But little by little, the villagers began to see the contrast. They noticed Amina's baskets and her quiet, confident way of moving through the market. Her reputation began to grow while Tendo's arrogance made him appear smaller in their eyes. Amina felt a small smile tug at her lips. She was not angry anymore. She was patient and she was planning. She knew that one day Tendo would realize that respect and skill were more powerful than pride and harsh words. She would not rush it, but she felt certain that her quiet strength would teach him the lesson he needed to learn. And so, each day, Amina continued her work, caring for her home, weaving her baskets, and learning the patience that comes from wisdom. She did not shout, she did not fight, but she grew stronger in her heart and mind. The villagers began to whisper about her skill, and Tendo remained unaware that the lesson had already begun, quietly, patiently, and powerfully. Amina had been married to Tendo for several months now, and life in Merna was settling into its usual rhythm. Yet the tension in their home was growing. Tendo's pride and harsh words made Amina feel small, but she refused to let it crush her spirit. She remembered her mother's advice: patience and quiet effort could be more powerful than anger or confrontation. So she decided to take a different path. Late one evening, after Tendo had gone to sleep, Amina lit a small candle and sat on the floor of their home. She took out the basket-making tools her mother had given her as a young girl and began weaving. The smell of fresh reeds filled the room, and her fingers moved skillfully, knotting and twisting each strand with care. Each basket she made was unique. Some were round, some tall, and some colored with bright patterns she had learned from local dyes. The work was quiet, steady, and peaceful. At first, she only made baskets for herself and her family. But as she continued, she began to notice something. The baskets were beautiful. People in the village had admired her work before, but now, as she produced more, she realized they could become something bigger. She decided to sell them in the market. The thought made her heart beat faster, but she was determined. The next morning, she rose early, fixed breakfast for Tendo, and made sure the house was clean before he left for the market. He barely looked at her, muttering about how she spent too much time on small hobbies instead of helping him manage the store. "A woman's work is in the home, Amina," he said sharply, not realizing she had already begun her new venture. Amina only smiled politely and nodded. Inside she felt calm. She knew that the baskets were her chance to show strength quietly, without anger or argument. After Tendo left, she carefully packed several baskets into a small cloth sack and walked to the market. At first, her stall was modest, just a small corner under the shade of a large tree. She placed her baskets neatly, arranging the colors so they caught the eye of passers-by. Then she waited, hoping someone would notice. It did not take long. The first customer was a woman named Nala, who had heard about Amina's weaving skills. "These baskets are beautiful," Nala said, picking up a round basket with red and yellow patterns. "I have never seen anything like this." Amina smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. "Thank you, ma'am. I made it myself," she said softly. Nala bought the basket immediately, and before the morning was over, several more people had come to Amina's stall. They admired her work, asked questions, and purchased baskets for their homes and shops. Amina kept working steadily, tying new knots and filling her stall with more patterns and shapes. Back at the market, Tendo was busy trying to sell his goods, but he noticed the attention Amina was receiving. Some of his customers were walking past him and stopping at her stall instead. At first, he felt irritation, thinking it was a small distraction. But as the day went on, more and more people came to Amina, praising her work, laughing with her, and handing over coins for her baskets. He approached her stall, trying to appear casual. "Amina, why are you spending your time here? You should be helping at home," he said sharply. Amina looked up at him calmly, her fingers still twisting reeds into a new basket. "I am working, Tendo," she said softly. "This is my work. It helps our family and it brings joy to others." Tendo frowned, confused. "Joy? What joy? You are wasting your time. Baskets will not make you rich or respected." Amina smiled gently. "Maybe not today. But people appreciate skill and effort. One day this work may bring more than we imagine." Tendo shook his head and walked away, muttering under his breath. He did not understand that Amina's patience and steady effort were already changing the way the villagers saw her. Word spread quickly through Merna. Amina, the quiet wife, was creating baskets that were beautiful, useful, and full of care. People began coming to her stall regularly, asking for baskets in all shapes and sizes. Some traders from nearby towns even started visiting, hoping to buy her products in larger numbers. Amina continued to work late into the nights, weaving baskets and preparing them for the market. Her hands became skilled, her eyes sharp, and her mind focused. She did not brag or boast about her work. She simply worked, patiently, knowing that her effort would speak louder than any words. Meanwhile, Tendo's pride remained unchanged. He mocked her behind her back, telling friends that she was wasting her time on childish crafts. But secretly, he could not ignore the growing number of people visiting Amina's stall. He noticed villagers smiling when they talked about her baskets and saw how she carried herself with quiet confidence. For the first time, a small seed of respect began to form in his mind, though he did not admit it. Over the weeks, Amina's baskets became well known beyond Merna. People from nearby towns came to buy them, and soon, Amina had more customers than Tendo did in his own store. Yet, she never let this success make her proud or impatient. She continued to wake early, help with the household, and work at her craft late into the night. Her patience was changing not only the villagers' opinions but also the course of her life. She realized that power could come quietly without shouting or fighting. She understood that respect was earned through skill, effort, and wisdom, not anger or loud words. Tendo, though still arrogant, began to notice small changes. He saw villagers greet Amina warmly, compliment her work, and seek her advice. Some even laughed quietly at his loud, boastful behavior while praising her calm and diligent nature. One evening, Amina returned home, her arms full of freshly woven baskets. She placed them neatly in the corner and smiled at the thought of the day's success. Tendo was in the courtyard, counting coins from his trading store. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "You spent all day at the market?" he asked. "Yes," Amina replied simply, her voice calm. "People appreciate hard work and skill. I am only trying to do my best." Tendo said nothing and turned away. But inside he felt a strange stir, a mixture of irritation, surprise, and a tiny hint of admiration. He could not yet see that Amina's quiet strength was teaching him a lesson he would never forget. From that day on, Amina continued her work. She did not rush, did not complain, and did not seek approval. Slowly, her baskets became a symbol of her wisdom, patience, and effort. The villagers began to see that strength did not always come from pride or loud words. It could come from quiet determination, skill, and consistent work. And so, while Tendo remained unaware, Amina's silent strength was shaping their future. She had begun to prove that respect and success were earned, not demanded, and that patience and quiet effort could be more powerful than any argument or confrontation. Months had passed since Amina quietly started her basket-making business, and the rhythm of life in Merna was changing. Tendo's trading shop, which had once been the pride of the town, began to face difficulties. Shipments arrived late or were damaged, and customers complained about mistakes. He had invested heavily in new goods, hoping to impress other traders, but instead, debts piled up. Tendo worked long hours, visiting the market, negotiating with suppliers, and trying to recover what he had lost, yet nothing seemed to go right. One morning, after a sleepless night, Tendo returned home exhausted. His shoulders slumped, his face lined with worry, and his hands shook slightly from fatigue. He opened the gate to their small courtyard and noticed something unusual: a group of children sitting quietly near the edge of the yard, holding small bowls. They looked up at him and smiled politely, but his attention was drawn immediately to Amina. She stood calmly among the children, distributing bread and porridge she had prepared from her own savings. Her hands moved gently, her voice soft as she encouraged the children to eat. Some of the children laughed as they received the food, and even a few adults from nearby houses came over to thank her. The warmth and care in her actions seemed to fill the courtyard with light. Tendo froze for a moment, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. He had come home tired, expecting to find his household empty and quiet, yet here was Amina giving away money, his money, and attention to others. His voice shook as he stepped closer. "How can you give money away when I'm broke?" he demanded. The words felt harsh even to him, but the frustration of months of loss poured out. Amina turned to him slowly, her calm expression unchanging. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him directly, her eyes steady and kind. "Because I still have what matters: purpose, honesty, and hard work," she said softly. Her voice did not carry anger, only clarity and quiet strength. Tendo took a step back, startled by her words. He opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came. He saw how the children smiled at Amina, how they trusted her completely, and how the villagers respected her actions. He realized for the first time that money alone did not bring respect or fulfillment. Pride, he saw now, had cost him more than any shipment or lost coin. It had cost him understanding, humility, and the ability to see what truly mattered. He sank onto the low wall of the courtyard, feeling a weight he had not known before. Amina continued to distribute food quietly, giving a loaf of bread to a small boy whose clothes were torn and a bowl of porridge to a girl who smiled shyly at her. Tendo watched her, noticing how her hands moved confidently, how her voice reassured and calmed everyone, and how the children listened and obeyed her naturally. Memories of the past months flooded into Tendo's mind. He remembered the days he had mocked her baskets, the times he had scolded her for working quietly, and the moments when he thought pride alone would make him strong. Now, in the light of her actions, he understood his mistake. Strength and respect were earned through consistent effort, care, and humility, not through arrogance or wealth. Amina finished giving out the food and turned to him again. "Tendo," she said softly, "you worry too much about loss and pride. Look around. There is more to life than gold and power. Helping others, being honest and working with care, that is what matters. That is what builds respect. Tendo sat silently, his pride shrinking as he considered her words. He remembered how villagers used to admire him for his wealth, yet now they looked to Amina with admiration, seeking her advice and helping hands. He realized that his arrogance had blinded him. He had thought he was teaching her a lesson by being proud and harsh, but in truth she had been teaching him, quietly without confrontation, with patience and consistent effort. The children, sensing his silence, approached him cautiously, offering him small pieces of bread. He looked at them, feeling a strange mixture of shame and warmth. For the first time he understood humility, that it was not a weakness, but a strength that could open doors and hearts. That day Tendo began to reflect on his actions. He walked around the courtyard slowly, noticing the small details he had ignored before. The neat lines of the baskets, the care Amina had taken in preparing the food, and the joy on the children's faces. He realized that his pride had cost him more than money, it had cost him respect, love, and understanding. Amina approached him and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "It is never too late to learn, Tendo," she said gently. "You can start today by seeing value in others, not just in yourself." Tendo nodded slowly. He felt the weight of his mistakes but also a small spark of hope. Perhaps he could change if he followed her example of patience, humility, and care. The lesson was clear and he could no longer ignore it. That afternoon Tendo began to help in small ways. He carried baskets for Amina, helped distribute food, and even greeted the villagers with a softer tone. The villagers noticed the change, though small, and began to respect him more because of the effort he was making, not because of wealth or words. Over the following days Tendo reflected daily on Amina's words: purpose, honesty, and hard work. He realized that life was not about pride or money alone, but about contributing positively to others and staying grounded. Amina had defeated him, not with anger or shouting, but by showing true strength, calmness, and consistency. By evening, as the sun set behind the hills of Merna, Tendo sat quietly beside Amina. He looked at her weaving baskets and felt a deep sense of respect and admiration. He knew he had been wrong, and that his journey toward humility had only just begun. But for the first time he understood the true meaning of strength, and how much his pride had cost him in the past months. Amina smiled softly, noticing the change in his demeanor. She said nothing more, letting her actions continue to speak. The lesson was already learned, quietly, patiently, and powerfully. From that day Tendo began to understand that life's true value was not in wealth, power, or pride, but in purpose, honesty, and the work done with care. And so, the turning point in Merna was not marked by anger or conflict, but by the calm wisdom of Amina and the slow awakening of Tendo's heart. When Tendo's trading business finally collapsed, the man who had once walked proudly through the streets of Merna with his head held high now returned home with heavy steps and a heart full of worry. The shops where he had sold his goods were empty, his debts were many, and the villagers whispered quietly about his misfortune. He felt ashamed, but he also felt something he had not felt before: a strange emptiness, a need to understand what truly mattered in life. Amina, however, was calm. She had been preparing for this moment without anyone noticing. Her basket-making business had grown steadily, and her earnings had been saved carefully. She looked at Tendo and saw the weight of pride broken but also a chance for change. Without hesitation, she stepped forward to rebuild not just their home, but the relationship and the life that had been shaken by arrogance and ignorance. Using her savings, Amina repaired the small house. The walls were painted with bright colors, the floor swept clean, and the rooms arranged neatly. Yet she added a new rule that surprised everyone, a rule that would teach Tendo a lesson he could never forget. Every person in the house, including Tendo, would contribute to the chores. Cleaning, cooking, sweeping, and organizing were now responsibilities for all. Tendo looked at her in disbelief. "You want me to cook? Sweep? Clean?" he asked, his voice shaking with disbelief and a hint of pride still clinging to him. "Yes," Amina said calmly, "if everyone works together, the house will be stronger. If everyone contributes, respect will grow. It is time you learned humility." For the first few days Tendo struggled. He had never held a broom with care, nor stirred a pot without spilling. He made mistakes and often grumbled under his breath, but Amina did not scold him. She guided him gently, showing him the right way to sweep a floor, the right way to wash dishes, and how to cook a simple meal. Each small task taught him patience and focus, and slowly he began to understand that work done with care built respect, both for oneself and for others. The villagers soon noticed the change. They would pass by the house and laugh quietly when they saw Tendo carrying a bucket of water or dusting a table. Amina has turned him into a maid, they would say, pointing to the once proud trader bending to sweep the courtyard. But Amina only smiled. She knew this was not humiliation. It was a lesson in humility, patience, and shared responsibility. Tendo's initial frustration turned into reflection. As he worked alongside Amina, he began to see her dedication, her patience, and her wisdom. He realized how much he had taken for granted: the care she had given their home, the quiet effort she had made to build her business, and the strength she had shown in adversity. Slowly he began to admire her, not as a wife who obeyed commands, but as a partner whose strength surpassed his own pride. Each day the chores became easier for him. He learned to wash dishes without spilling, to sweep neatly, and even to cook simple meals that tasted good. But more importantly, he began to understand respect. It was no longer just a word. It was something he experienced every time he helped with the housework, every time he followed Amina's guidance, and every time he saw the children and villagers smile at her kindness and skill. Amina continued her work with quiet determination. She balanced running the basket-making business, helping Tendo learn his lessons, and caring for their home. Her patience never faltered, and her wisdom shone through her calm actions. She did not rush Tendo, nor did she demand immediate change. Instead, she allowed him to stumble, to reflect, and to grow at his own pace. Over time, Tendo began to change not just in action but in heart. He learned humility, recognizing that no task was too small and that every effort mattered. He began to appreciate the work others did around him, from the smallest chores to the most important decisions. He realized that true respect was not demanded through wealth or pride, but earned through understanding, effort, and care. Villagers continued to talk about Tendo's transformation. They marveled at how Amina had guided him without anger, without shaming him publicly, but simply through her example and wisdom. Children giggled as they saw him scrubbing the floor or cooking meals, and neighbors nodded in quiet approval of the lessons being taught inside that home. One afternoon, as Tendo prepared a simple meal under Amina's supervision, he paused and looked at her. "I see now," he said quietly, "how wrong I was. I thought pride and money could make me strong. But it was patience, hard work, and respect that truly matter." Amina smiled, her hands busy folding freshly woven baskets. "I never wanted to hurt you, Tendo. I only wanted you to understand what strength really is," she said softly. From that day, the house in Merna was no longer a place of tension or pride. It became a home of learning, respect, and shared effort. Tendo's transformation continued, and the villagers continued to laugh fondly at the sight of him performing chores he had once refused, knowing that the lesson he was learning was far more valuable than any pride or wealth he had lost. And so, through patience, quiet guidance, and a simple rule of shared responsibility, Amina taught Tendo the most important lesson of all: that humility and respect are earned through action, and true strength is shown in caring for others. Time passed in Merna, and Tendo's transformation became more complete with each day. The man who had once been proud and quick to anger now moved with care and thoughtfulness. He helped Amina in small ways at first, carrying water, tending to the children, and assisting with chores around the house. But soon he began to extend his kindness beyond their home. He spoke gently to villagers, assisted neighbors with heavy work, and guided young men in understanding the value of patience, humility, and shared effort. People began to notice the change. Tendo, once known for his pride and arrogance, now walked through the market with a quiet confidence. Children greeted him, merchants nodded respectfully, and neighbors smiled as they saw him carrying baskets, helping an elder, or fixing something broken without complaint. Tendo understood that no work was too small, no task beneath anyone, and that true strength was shown through action, not words. Meanwhile, Amina's basket-making business continued to grow. What had started as a small corner stall under the shade of a tree had expanded into a proper workshop. Women from Merna and nearby villages came to learn the craft, eager to work and earn for their families. Amina trained them patiently, teaching both skill and the values of hard work, honesty, and care. The workshop became a hub of energy and hope, filled with laughter, chatter, and the gentle rhythm of weaving. Tendo often worked alongside the women, helping where he could, lifting supplies or organizing materials. The villagers, who once whispered about his arrogance, now watched in amazement. He had not only changed himself, but he was helping others understand what he had learned: that pride could blind a person, but humility and effort could open hearts and minds. One day, a group of villagers approached Tendo. They asked him how he had changed so completely, how he had learned humility, and why he no longer acted with pride. Tendo laughed softly, a warm and genuine sound that carried through the small street. "My wife beat me," he said, smiling at Amina who stood nearby, "not with hands but with wisdom." The villagers paused, thinking about his words. They looked at Amina who simply smiled, her eyes reflecting patience and quiet strength. Everyone understood then that her lesson had been gentle yet powerful. She had not forced change through anger or punishment, but through guidance, patience, and example. From that day on, Tendo became a mentor in the village. Young men asked him for advice about work, respect, and relationships. He taught them that helping others, no matter the task, was not a sign of weakness but of strength. He encouraged them to value patience, to work steadily, and to respect everyone regardless of status. The lessons he shared were not theoretical. He demonstrated them every day through his actions. Amina's workshop continued to thrive. The women she trained began to earn for themselves and their families, gaining confidence and independence. They learned more than just weaving. They learned discipline, teamwork, and how to respect their own abilities. The community admired Amina's vision, and the story of her patience and guidance spread throughout Merna and beyond. Tendo often reflected on the journey. He remembered the days when pride had ruled his life, when he mocked Amina and ignored the value of quiet work. He remembered how he had resisted helping, how he had been blind to respect and humility. Now he understood that strength was not loud, flashy, or born from arrogance. Strength was consistent, thoughtful, and shared with others. In time, the home of Amina and Tendo became a symbol of change and hope in Merna. Villagers would often speak about them with respect, telling stories of how a woman's wisdom and patience could transform a household, a man, and even a community. Children grew up seeing Tendo and Amina work together, learning that cooperation, humility, and care were far more valuable than pride or wealth. The legacy of their change endured. Tendo's words, "My wife beat me, not with hands but with wisdom," became a saying that parents shared with their children. And people of Merna would often remind one another, true strength is not in shouting but in showing. Through patience, quiet effort, and the consistent example of living with integrity, Amina and Tendo had not only transformed themselves but also influenced the hearts of everyone around them. The village grew stronger, more respectful, and kinder, proving that the most powerful lessons are often taught with love, care, and quiet strength rather than force.